Most people spend their entire lives obsessed with what others think of them, while a small minority become obsessed with themselves. And that small difference changes everything. If you are watching this, you probably feel a deep sense of existential urgency, a creeping realization that you are living a life designed by someone else, trapped in the suffocating expectations of a society that demands your constant sacrifice. You might feel utterly trapped in uninspiring jobs and relationships, exhausted by the relentless demands of the world, and burdened by the heavy, suffocating weight of disappointment. You wake up every single morning feeling anxious, pouring your precious energy into the bottomless pits of other people's needs, only to return to your bed at night feeling completely drained and profoundly empty. But what if the very thing you have been taught to avoid your entire life, focusing entirely and unapologetically on yourself, is the actual key to your ultimate liberation? I have spent years studying evolved minds, working intimately with thousands of individuals and exploring the profound depths of inner alchemy. Through this work, I have discovered a terrifying but liberating truth. We are deeply conditioned from childhood to believe that prioritizing ourselves is inherently selfish, narcissistic, and morally wrong. We are trained to feel guilty when we say no, to shrink ourselves to make others comfortable, and to become resentful when we pour our love and energy into empty vessels, desperately hoping to be loved and validated in return. But to understand the true psychology of human evolution and to break free from this matrix of self-sacrifice, we must look to the profound wisdom of Carl Jung and his psychological concept of individuation. Individuation is the ultimate sacred journey of becoming who you truly are, a rigorous process of integrating your conscious mind with the hidden, darker shadows of your psyche to achieve absolute wholeness. This process does not happen by accident. It requires a deliberate, fierce, and constructive self-obsession. Think about it this way. When you are on a flight, and the cabin pressure suddenly drops, the flight attendant sternly instructs you to put your own airplane oxygen mask on first before attempting to assist others. Why? Because you cannot save anyone if you are suffocating and passing out from a lack of oxygen. You cannot pour life-giving water from a completely empty cup. This is the fundamental healer's duty. A healer must first meticulously master their own emotional toolkit, heal their own deepest wounds, and perfect their craft before they can ever hope to transform the lives of others. Reframing this misunderstood concept from a state of toxic selfishness into a state of profound self-respect and moral duty is the very first step toward experiencing true abundance. It is not about vanity or ego. It is about taking absolute, uncompromising responsibility for your own physical and spiritual vessel so that you can eventually serve the world from a place of overflowing energy rather than desperate depletion. You have to ask yourself some direct, probing questions. Do you want to reach the end of your life feeling empty, realizing with crushing regret that you only played a background character in someone else's script? Or do you want to reclaim your authenticity, step into your true power, and awaken to your own boundless greatness? My own journey toward this radical realization did not come easily or peacefully. In my early 30s, I hit an absolute devastating rock bottom. I was living exclusively for everyone else, constantly bending and breaking myself to fit into familial and societal expectations, desperately trying to be the perfect friend, the flawless partner, and the tirelessly compliant employee. On the outside, I looked like a success, but inside, I was entirely hollow. The frustration and emptiness became unbearable, culminating in a terrifying moment of sheer exhaustion where I physically collapsed on my living room floor, weeping not from a passing sadness, but from a profound, terrifying loss of self. I realized in that shattering moment that I was a complete stranger in my own body, a ghost haunting my own existence. It was in that dark, agonizing night of the soul that I made a solemn, sacred vow to study my own soul, to become relentlessly obsessed with my own healing and personal growth, and to completely forget about the distracting noise and endless demands of others. To survive and ultimately thrive, I began to painstakingly construct a comprehensive framework of 4 critical dimensions: mind, emotion, spirit, and body, that would serve as the unshakable pillars of my personal evolution. This leads us to the first dimension, the conscious mind and the absolute non-negotiable necessity of controlling your daily inputs. Every single day, your conscious mind is relentlessly bombarded by external opinions, toxic news cycles, devastating social media comparisons, and the projecting fears and insecurities of those around you. If you do not actively and ruthlessly curate what enters your mind, society will gladly program it for you, filling it with limitation and fear. You must cultivate an impenetrable mental fortress. This means ruthlessly cutting out digital and social distractions, silencing the external critics, and feeding your intellect with profound knowledge that inspires true greatness. You have to master your thoughts, recognizing the fundamental universal law that where your attention goes, your reality inevitably follows. When you become fiercely obsessed with your own mental clarity, you automatically stop caring about petty dramas, office politics, and superficial judgments. You start asking yourself direct, probing questions that force deep self-reflection. What do I actually believe to be true? What are my genuine core values? Why am I allowing this toxic, negative thought to occupy valuable real estate in my head? By taking absolute charge of your conscious mind, you step out of a weak, reactive state and step firmly into a powerful, proactive state of creation. This leads us seamlessly to the second dimension, emotional development and taking absolute sovereign ownership of your inner states. Most people live their entire lives completely at the mercy of their turbulent emotions, reacting blindly and aggressively to every minor trigger, feeling deeply guilty when they even think about prioritizing their own needs, and holding on to toxic, deep-seated resentment toward the very people who drain them of their life force. Constructive self-obsession means bravely turning your gaze inward and becoming an undisputed master of your own emotional landscape. It means having the courage to sit quietly with your pain, your intense anxiety, and your boiling frustration without trying to numb them with distractions or project them onto the people around you. I once worked intimately with a highly driven but deeply unfulfilled entrepreneur who had built a massively successful business on paper. But behind closed doors, he was completely drained, suffering from panic attacks and emotionally numb. He was absolutely terrified of letting anyone down, so he reflexively said yes to every pointless meeting, every unreasonable client demand, and every draining plea for help from his staff. By actively teaching him to focus entirely on his own emotional well-being and to forget about the constant approval of his industry, he learned to establish incredibly strong, loving boundaries. He realized, through painful inner alchemy, that his constant people-pleasing was actually a subconscious manipulation tactic designed to secure external validation because he lacked internal self-worth. When he finally started prioritizing his own joy, peace, and emotional stability, an amazing thing happened. His business actually thrived and scaled massively because he was finally leading from a place of authentic, grounded power rather than from a place of fearful, exhausted obligation. You must develop a robust emotional toolkit that allows you to efficiently process your complex feelings, integrate your dark shadows, and strengthen your emotional resilience against the chaotic storms of life. When you are truly obsessed with your own emotional health, the fleeting opinions of others completely lose their grip on your psyche. You no longer need their superficial validation because you have finally learned how to thoroughly validate yourself. Now let's talk about the third dimension, spiritual growth and connecting to a much deeper, authentic purpose that transcends the mundane reality of daily survival. Spirituality in this specific context is not necessarily about organized religion. It is about cultivating a sacred, unbreakable connection to your own profound inner truth. It is the very essence of the process of individuation that Carl Jung spoke of so deeply and passionately. When you forcefully forget about the heavy expectations of others, you intentionally create the vast, quiet silence necessary to actually hear the whispers of your own soul. You begin to slowly uncover the unique, beautiful gifts and dormant talents that you were brought into this world to share. Tragically, many people desperately fear this silence because it forces them to brutally confront the stark emptiness of their current, unlived existence. But true spiritual evolution absolutely requires you to brave that terrifying silence. Consider the heartbreaking but ultimately triumphant story of an exhausted, drained single mother I once knew. She was entirely consumed day and night by the endless needs of her demanding children, her declining, aging parents, and her incredibly ungrateful boss. She felt incredibly guilty even taking a brief 10-minute bath at the end of the day, genuinely believing the toxic lie that any time spent nourishing herself was selfishly stolen from her dependents. But she was running entirely on fumes, constantly snapping at her kids in frustration, crying in secret, and rapidly spiraling into a dark, heavy depression. When she finally hit her breaking point and courageously embraced the liberating concept of constructive self-obsession, she began fiercely dedicating time to her own spiritual nourishment, ignoring the guilt that tried to pull her back. She started meditating in the early dawn, meticulously journaling her repressed thoughts, and slowly reconnecting with her long-lost childhood passion for painting. This radical shift wasn't selfish. It was a miraculous, systemic transformation. By intentionally filling her own spiritual cup first, she organically became a vastly more patient, deeply loving, and profoundly present mother. She vividly demonstrated to her observant children exactly what it looks like to live a vibrant, self-respecting, and joyful life. Her intense spiritual awakening was a powerful catalyst that completely healed and elevated her entire family dynamic. You must relentlessly seek out that which makes your own spirit feel truly alive, whether it is immersing yourself in nature, creating art, practicing deep meditation, or simply engaging in quiet, undisturbed contemplation. You have to be passionately obsessed with aligning your daily, habitual actions with your absolute highest spiritual calling. Finally, we arrive at the critical fourth dimension, physical evolution as the undeniable biological foundation of all human energy and potential. You absolutely cannot separate the mind, emotion, and spirit from the physical, biological vessel that carries them through this world. Your body is the literal temple of your consciousness. If you are constantly feeding it toxic garbage, chronically depriving it of restorative sleep, and letting it slowly wither away in a miserable state of sedentary lethargy, you are fundamentally disrespecting yourself on a cellular level. Constructive self-obsession absolutely requires you to nourish your physical body with the highest quality fuel available, to move it daily with fierce intention and growing strength, and to rest it with deep, unapologetic reverence. When you truly master your physical health, you automatically generate the massive, abundant energy required to tackle the heavy, exhausting lifting of mental, emotional, and spiritual growth. The ironclad discipline forged in the sweat of the gym, the endurance built on the running trail, or the flexibility cultivated on the yoga mat translates directly and powerfully into the mental discipline needed to set firm boundaries and aggressively pursue your authentic purpose in the real world. Your physical evolution is the heavy anchor of your personal power, grounding your spiritual aspirations in biological reality. But as you bravely begin to integrate these four complex dimensions and aggressively reclaim your life, you will inevitably face massive, sometimes overwhelming resistance. Now, let's talk about the intense resistance you will inevitably face, both from external peers and from your own deeply ingrained internal conditioning. When you finally start saying no, when you start unapologetically putting yourself first, the people around you will push back, often viciously. They will loudly call you selfish. They will try to maliciously guilt-trip you into returning to the old, weak, compliant version of yourself that was so incredibly convenient for them to use and exploit. This is the exact crucible where your newfound resolve will be severely tested. You must deeply understand that their aggressive resistance is not actually about you at all. It is a glaring reflection of their own deep-seated fear, their own glaring insecurities, and their own stubborn unwillingness to do the difficult inner work required for their own evolution. They are unconsciously threatened by your rapid evolution because your blinding light holds up a harsh mirror to their own miserable stagnation. You have to be absolutely, unapologetically ruthless in protecting your sacred energy. You must quickly learn to completely let go of draining relationships that are heavily anchored in your past trauma, mutual complaining, and shared weakness. At the very same time, you will fiercely battle the insidious internal guilt implanted in your brain by years of toxic societal and familial conditioning. You will clearly hear a nagging, anxious voice in your head, whispering that you are a fundamentally bad person for choosing to prioritize yourself. You must violently silence that lying voice with the undeniable, ultimate truth that your absolute highest moral duty in this universe is to become the strongest, most capable, highly evolved, and most whole version of yourself possible. To successfully do this and survive the resistance, you need highly practical implementation strategies. You cannot just endlessly philosophize about self-obsession. You must brutally operationalize it in your daily, waking routine. The very first step is a practice what I call the sacred hour. You must aggressively carve out 1 full hour every single day, preferably first thing in the quiet of the morning before the world wakes up, that is entirely and selfishly devoted to you and you alone. This is your non-negotiable, sacred self-reflection time. During this protected hour, your phone is completely off, the outside world does not exist, and you engage solely and deeply in practices that directly elevate your 4 dimensions. You read complex texts, you meditate deeply, you exercise fiercely, and you meticulously plan your grand vision. If you cowardly claim that you do not have a single hour to spare, you are blatantly lying to yourself, and you are actively choosing to remain a pathetic victim of your own chaotic circumstances. The second highly practical step is the weekly life audit. Once a week, you must sit down in total isolation and ruthlessly evaluate exactly where your precious energy went over the last 7 days. Who completely drained you? What specific activities brought you genuine joy and expansion? Where did you weekly compromise your boundaries just to please someone else and avoid conflict? This brutally honest audit allows you to rapidly course-correct, immediately and tightly focus your intense energy back onto your own personal growth. The third critical step is the uncompromising daily enforcement of loving boundaries. A boundary is not a hostile brick wall designed to aggressively keep people out. It is a crystal-clear, highly defined parameter that explicitly communicates where your energy ends and where others begin. It is the practice of communicating with calm grace but absolute, unshakable firmness exactly what behavior you will and will not tolerate in your presence. When you masterfully combine the daily discipline of the sacred hour, the brutal honesty of the weekly life audit, and the protective shield of loving boundaries, you actively create an impenetrable, radiant fortress around your personal evolution. To truly deeply understand the staggering magnitude of this type of total life transformation, let me share the profoundly moving story of a severely disconnected 55-year-old man who came to me feeling like his entire decades-long life had been a tragic, irredeemable waste. He had dutifully worked a soul-crushing corporate job he absolutely despised for 30 long years, simply to financially support a lavish lifestyle that ironically brought him absolutely zero joy. His once passionate marriage had slowly dissolved into a polite, painfully cold roommate situation, and his adult children were completely grown, geographically scattered, and emotionally distant. He felt entirely invisible, profoundly and chronically exhausted, and deeply, achingly regretful. He was standing terrified on the bleak precipice of his senior years, absolutely paralyzed by the fear of reaching the inevitable end of his life, feeling completely empty and realizing he had never truly lived. I looked him in the eye and aggressively challenged him to become entirely, ruthlessly obsessed with himself. At first, the very idea deeply repulsed him. He had been heavily conditioned and taught his entire life that a good man stoically sacrifices everything, his dreams, his health, his joy, for the sake of his family and the bottom line of his company. But the excruciating, suffocating pain of his current, miserable reality finally outweighed his immense, paralyzing fear of change. He started incredibly small. He dedicated just 15 minutes a morning to brutally honest journaling, bleeding his repressed regrets onto the page. He began to bravely explore the deeply suppressed, forgotten desires of his vibrant youth. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to rebuild his deteriorating physical body, lifting weights, walking miles, eventually losing 30 pounds of stress-induced weight and miraculously regaining a surging vitality he hadn't felt since he was in his 20s. He started taking an absolute, fierce ownership of his internal emotional states, stubbornly refusing to wallow in toxic regret and instead intensely focusing his mind entirely on the power of the present moment. He bravely instituted incredibly firm, loving boundaries with his demanding, toxic colleagues, effectively stopping their emotional vampirism, and eventually he masterfully negotiated a strategic, lucrative transition completely out of his soul-draining corporate role. In the quiet space he created by forgetting about the demanding expectations of his industry, he entirely rediscovered his dormant spark, a deep, burning passion for fine woodworking that he had abandoned in his youth. He boldly started a small, incredibly fulfilling business, meticulously crafting custom, beautiful furniture with his own two hands. He radically changed his career, aggressively redesigned his entire life from the absolute ground up, and finally, for the first time in over 3 decades, began actually living his own authentic story. The resulting transformation was nothing short of miraculous. His entire energetic aura completely shifted from heavy and dark to light and magnetic, paradoxically by completely forgetting about the heavy, suffocating expectations of his estranged ex-wife, his former, demanding bosses, and society at large. He actually became a massive, radiant beacon of inspiration to everyone around him. His adult children, witnessing his incredible, undeniable transformation from a hollow shell of a man into a vibrant, passionate creator, actively reached out and deeply reconnected with him, magnetically drawn by his newfound, unshakable authenticity and infectious joy. He finally found the deep, lasting inner peace and profound self-respect that had eluded him his entire life, definitively proving to himself and the world that it is absolutely never, ever too late to radically reclaim your life. His profound story is a living, breathing testament to the sheer, unparalleled power of constructive self-obsession. It is the absolute ultimate inner alchemy, magically turning the heavy, toxic lead of a wasted, resentful life into the brilliant, shining gold of true, realized individuation. Now, I am turning the mirror and challenging you directly, right here, right now. Look closely and honestly at your own life. Look hard at the hidden places where you are constantly bleeding precious energy, weakly compromising your infinite soul, and desperately living for the cheap applause of people who do not truly care about your ultimate well-being. It is time to aggressively stop the bleeding. It is time to finally awaken to the absolute, undeniable reality that you are the sole, powerful author of your own existence. I want you to start actively dedicating 15 minutes a day, starting immediately today, to your own relentless growth. Do not foolishly wait for a devastating health crisis, a bitter divorce, or a massive financial collapse to finally force your hand. Do not tragically wait until you are lying helplessly on your deathbed, suffocating under the crushing, unbearable weight of your own unlived potential and endless regrets. Make the radical, fiercely courageous choice today to become completely, unapologetically obsessed with your own latent greatness. Actively cultivate your sharp mind, fiercely master your turbulent emotions, deeply nourish your eternal spirit, and intensely strengthen your physical body. Bravely integrate your hidden shadows, fully embrace your weird, authentic self, and boldly walk the difficult, lonely, but infinitely rewarding path of true individuation. The world absolutely does not need any more burnt-out, bitter, resentful martyrs who tragically sacrifice their beautiful souls on the bloody altar of societal expectations and false nobility. The world desperately, urgently needs people who have truly come alive, people who have bravely done the difficult, agonizing inner work to become completely whole, incredibly vibrant, and massively overflowing with genuine, unconditional love and grounded power. When you selfishly but constructively save yourself, you organically and inadvertently help save the entire world, because your very radiant existence becomes a powerful, undeniable permission slip for everyone else around you to bravely do exactly the same. This is the absolute, ultimate truth embedded deep within Carl Jung's profound philosophy of the human psyche. Forget entirely about the distracting noise of the masses. Forget completely about the cynical critics who sit safely in the cheap seats of life. Forget entirely about the endless, exhausting pursuit of external validation. Turn your intense gaze strictly inward and absolutely never ever look back at the illusion you left behind. The arduous journey to complete psychological and spiritual wholeness is the single most sacred, important endeavor you will ever undertake in this lifetime. It aggressively demands absolutely everything you have: your courage, your discipline, your tears, and your absolute focus. But it ultimately, predictably rewards you with the one and only thing in this entire universe that truly, deeply matters: yourself. If this message has offered you even a single insight that expands your vision, make sure to subscribe and activate the notifications. Choose to become your own priority, not out of vanity, but out of love.